To my mind, art is in fact a public good. It actually brings the sense of purpose, the sense of inspiration, the sense of context, of nuance, of knowledge that cannot be provided in other ways to a society. That cannot be made impossible by wealth.
A common concern for any parent is wondering what your child is going to do when they grow up. For the family of Damian Woetzel, there was no such anxiety. His professional pathway may be traced to a moment when, aged 11, he says, one of the ballet masters took the time to show me a few exercises in the lobby of his local ballet school in Boston, Massachusetts. He says, I learned right on the spot how to turn multiple times, pirouettes, just while I was waiting for the car. Well, this was the beginning of a lifetime of dance. Damian Woetzel worked his way to become a principal dancer with the New York City Ballet, performing also with the likes of the Kirov. He retired in 2008, going to lecture in the law department at Harvard and then serving on President Barack Obama's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. He's now president of the Juilliard School in New York, where he aims to transform the world-class musical college into a fee-free establishment. I'm Emma Nelson, and this is The Big Interview with Damian Woetzel. Damian, a very warm welcome to The Big Interview.
Thanks so much. Good to be with you, Emma.
So let's go straight back to this moment in the lobby in Boston in the ballet school. And you suddenly start to turn and you realise that this is something that's rather special. I mean, does ballet click with you from a very early age, or do things take a little bit longer?
My first dance lesson, I suppose, was when I was 4 years old. And when I look back on that, it was literally like walking in a circle, clapping in time and, that sort of thing. But pretty quickly I began performing, and that's what kind of was the bite, I guess. I was in the Nutcracker in Boston from about age 7, and being on stage, it was just a magical world, to inhabit. And that became something I did every December. And that's really how I thought of it. I wasn't thinking so much about the dancing so much as this was a chance to perform and to be in a theatrical kind of environment. I remember just, between matinee and evenings, exploring this fabulous old theater in Boston, and kind of it was like living an amazing kind of theatrical dream almost. And then the music and the costumes and the whole thing was just, amazing. All along, though, I was doing other stuff. I was, I had one brother, and we had musical instruments, and I played the flute, and there were lots of different things. But at 11, there was this kind of transformational moment where I decided, and I'm not even sure exactly why at this moment, but I just thought rather than taking like one ballet lesson a week, I'd do it a couple of times. It became a little bit more, maybe it was social. I kind of liked the environment. I liked the people. And sure enough, it started to become very clear very quickly that the effort I put into that, the output I was getting was so much more than what other things I was doing. And that kind of moment you described was real. I was waiting to get picked up. It was about 6:30 on a dark kind of winter Boston night. And this man who was the kind of the ballet master of the Boston Ballet was waiting. He was waiting to take a rehearsal, I guess, and I was waiting to go home. And he knew me from the Nutcracker, and he just said, hey, while you're here, why don't we work on those turns I saw you trying to do in class? And within a matter of 10 or 15 minutes, suddenly he had taught me something that was ready to be learned, I guess is the way to put it. So like waiting to happen. And I found out very quickly that I had a very good kind of equilibrium for turning. And that was the beginning. And then from there, it was so fast. I mean, by the time I was 12, I was like, that's it. I'm going to be a dancer. And that's all I wanted to do. It's all I wanted to read about. It's all I wanted to kind of focus on. And I started kind of just narrowing my aperture on that.
And where does ballet fit into all this? Because you are brought up in a very international household, aren't you? Your father born to German parents in China. Your mother has Irish heritage. She is a program officer for UNICEF. Your father is a law professor who has this amazing phrase that he wants you to live big lives.
It was, a surprise, I think, when at 12, as I just said, I said, okay, this is it. I'm going to be a dancer. And along with that means I'm not going to college, because dancers, if they're really doing what I want to do to become a ballet dancer, I'm going to be going to New York and I'm going to join a major company by the time I'm 18 years old. And that was definitely not the plan. So that took a little work, is what I would say. But, every now and again things align. And this turned out to be one of those things where things started to happen in sequence. And by the time I was 15, I had made my quote unquote debut in New York with a company from Los Angeles. My family had moved to Los Angeles by then. And I got a couple of good reviews, and it was like quite clear, like this is real. It wasn't just me. It was actually starting to take on real heft. So in fact, by the time I was 17, I was in New York, and I joined New York City Ballet just after my 18th birthday.
Which sounds simple enough, but you do have to persuade your parents, especially your
Yeah.
father, your law professor father. You're not going to college, you're going to dance. And dance always has that reputation for being one of the most precarious gigs there is.
There was definitely a lot of that. Well, what will happen when? That idea that there was this disaster waiting, at any given moment, that you get injured or, just time out or whatnot. So that was in the back of my mind. But, to be kind of young, headstrong, and foolish, you just kind of say, that's fantastic, great, it's going to be fine. And I just, it was building a life too, I will say. I mean, I feel like that early time when I was, describing like 8 years old between matinee and evening at the music hall in Boston, it gets in your head. It's like, this is a real life with theatrical people, and the chance to be on stage in a magical kind of environment is very intoxicating. And so it only got more so as it became about skill. It's like when I was actually able to start performing because of the actual dancing itself and that what I put into that work. The more I worked at it, the more classes, the more knowledge I built, the more I developed, even like growing physically, being able to partner and to lift the ballerinas and to find a way to actually chart my own progress became very self-affirming. And so those conversations were not smooth, but they worked out.
There's an article about you written in 1995 in the New York Times, and we'll refer to it quite a few times because it's got some rather delicious morsels about the 1995 Damian Woetzel. They describe you as enjoying a seemingly flawless ascent to the ranks of America's best young dancers. Did it feel flawless at the time?
No, I wouldn't say flawless at all, actually. I would say determined, probably. Where I'm sitting right now talking to you, I'm looking out at Lincoln Center and I can see the theater where I basically grew up in New York State Theater, home of New York City Ballet. And I can, I'm sitting in my office at Juilliard and I can remember arriving in New York and that first moment of kind of walking by the theater, looking at the posters, thinking of like, wow, is this my place? This is where I want to be. And then as it happened, the School of American Ballet, which was the school of New York City Ballet, sort of the gateway to going to New York City Ballet, at that time was in Juilliard. So I came here and I looked up at this building and I went to the third floor for my first class. And then I made I will say, a fairly quick pathway through, about 6 months in the school before joining New York City Ballet. But, it was very much kind of coming from a smaller place to the big time, as it were, and seeing other dancers who, I mean, I can tell you, like, to be a boy in ballet in America at that time, and to some degree still, was definitely a rarity. It was just, you were the one guy in the class at times. And of course, coming to New York's a whole nother story. It's like, this is the best young boys from around the country were in my class to a real degree. We have many more notable, schools of ballet in America and globally than existed in 1984. This was much more concentrated. So I was, eyes were wide open, and I still think about those first classes and trying to kind of figure out where I fit into this hierarchy. But then once I got in the company, I got some early opportunities, which gave me good reason to think, okay, we're going. But I was convinced that I remember thinking, I need to become indispensable. I need to figure out a way to make sure that when the moment comes, I can do it. And that was very much on my mind. A lot of that had to do, frankly, with partnering. Like if you had to dance, it was one thing to be able to do the solo, but you have to do the whole ballet. So there was a lot of thinking around that. But I will say it wasn't, what was the word you said? flawless ascent or it was like not exactly, but I will say 4 years after I joined, I was a principal dancer, which is nothing to complain about. It was pretty great.
And what we
It's
read
amazing.
of you at the time is someone who really has a very distinct approach to doing things. I think people are noticing, even from the point when you haven't been there very long, you're already creating your own moves. You're already developing your role as a choreographer as well. But also there's this, I'm referring to the New York Times article, you're quite a character. You have an infallible theory at the time, and I wonder if the grown-up Wetzel can talk about this. Your theory before you were 30 to maintain your physical sharpness was to stop smoking at 30, get a second wind and beat the aging process. And the New York Times says you inhale another Camel Light, your constant companion, and on the frequent occasions when he can't be bothered with food. I mean, how much of a character were you? Or are
Such
you?
a jerk. Oh my God, such a jerk. That is so crazy. Well, it was a different time, as they say, and smoking was it felt like being a rock star. It was so great, in its own way. And I was dancing so much. I mean, I remember in my theater case, which is the case that kind of follows you around your whole career where you put your stuff, I had a little thing I put in there when I was 18 from like MTV that said, too much is never enough. And I was very much in that track. I wanted to dance more then. I'd never wanted to dance once a night. I wanted to dance 3 times. Didn't want to do 4 performances a week. I wanted to do 8 performances a week. I was kind of, my appetite for it was immense. And so I was living in a way that I guess it's in that article in a way, despite the ridiculousness of all the smoking. I will say I did quit and I did get a second win. So it wasn't entirely nonsense, but it was perhaps a little later than 30, but not too much.
Tell us about some of the favourite moments you had on stage, the roles that you played when you were at the absolute height of your powers.
Well, I think one of the first and one of the last is a ballet called Rubies. Rubies is the second of a 3-part evening by Balanchine called Jewels. It starts with emeralds, then rubies, then diamonds. Emeralds is sort of Belle Epoque, France. It's music by Fauré. Stravinsky is Rubies, and it's kind of jazz age, and it's very kind of American driving from that kind of musical perspective. And then Diamonds is Imperial Russia with Tchaikovsky. I got to do Rubies young. It was one of the first principal roles I got to do. I was still in the corps de ballet. And it was a ballet I danced on my retirement when I retired in 2008. And when I think about like that time, it was like getting to inhabit that world, and it's pure dance and pure movement and athleticism and very particularly American in a sense in terms of its drive and the vernacular dances that are baked into it. I think about that one as being just not only pivotal, but wow, what a thrill to get to do it, honestly. On the other end of the spectrum, for all my talk about leaving behind fairy tales and all that sort of stuff, the ballet Prodigal Son, which Balanchine did for Diaghilev and Ballet Russe in 1929, music by Prokofiev, and it's like kind of the world's greatest story ballet. In about 33 minutes, you tell this tale of young, impetuous strength brought low, and then the redemption of going home. I did that on my retirement as well, and that was really a ballet that I did over many years and grew into in different ways at different times, full of, all the technique and the things you need to do as a dancer technically, but also deeply an opportunity to inhabit a real world on stage. And I guess the third one I'd say between those two is Jerome Robbins' Dances at a Gathering, set to Chopin, and it's just 10 dancers over the course of an hour and kind of scenes almost without stories, but very, very emotionally satisfying as well as technically groundbreaking. That ballet I got to do throughout my entire career as well.
Let's move on to that moment when you leave, when you stop dancing. You retire at what, age 33? What is it that makes you stop? Because quite a lot of principals have got more road in them at that age.
No, so I actually retired when I was 41.
Sorry, okay.
Yes, but by the time I'm 33, I'm starting different parts of my life, is what's happened. So the questions earlier about, the choice to become a dancer leaves everything else behind. Well, I guess my version of that was not so fast. By the time I was a principal, I had already kind of embraced the idea that there was other ways to go to college. You can, do different things. You can educate yourself, autodidactic type things. But I very much want to be a part of a bigger conversation than simply being a performer. I think that's the first thing. I start choreographing. I want to make the dances. I start participating in touring groups and then leading my own touring groups, taking groups of dancers and musicians on tours in America and to Europe and different places, South America, lots of different places where I am sort of the leader. At the same time, I'm starting to have conversations around the role of dance in the ecosystem that comes with the music part. And I had a lot of early music training, as I mentioned, in Boston. And as a choreographer, I was working very closely with composers and engaging with music a lot. And that became, okay, where's dance in this ecosystem? And is it, how do I move that forward? Or how does this become more important, I guess, is what I was probably looking for, have more sway. But then that gets one more step out where it becomes I'm talking about how the art itself and the arts world fits into a bigger picture in society, and how does art have a bigger role to play, very influenced by Leonard Bernstein and his own discussions and his talking about it and testifying before Congress about the role of the arts. And Lincoln Kirstein, who is the great founder, the actually brought Balanchine from Europe to found the School of American Ballet and City Ballet, one of the great kind of makers of everything from New York City Ballet to Museum of Modern Art and all the things that built over here in New York over the course of the 20th century were a part of building a city and building a country, building a national platform for arts. And I was like, this is a whole nother world that I am engaged in and wanted to be a part of. So by the time I'm, getting to your 33, I'm actually I'm living two lives to some degree. I'm performing and very focused. I'm dancing every night of the week over there. I'm choreographing. I'm trying to make my way as a creative. And at the same time, I'm starting to be a person who goes to convenings and talks about the role of the arts or is involved in some way in projects that are wider than the original concept of just I'm getting to dance rubies.
Damian, what's it like going from being someone at the absolute top of their game and being world renowned to having to start learning again from scratch?
Thrilling. Oh my God, it was so exciting. A little scary here and there. But, so the first goal was, okay, I think I can do this. I don't see why I can't. But there was a little bit of trepidation about, I'm going back in the classroom. And Kennedy School has a lot of, that's the School of Government at Harvard that I went to. There's a lot of statistics and quant and things like that. And I had left math a long, way back, And I just thought, and it was never my favorite thing to begin with. So taking these GRE tests, the tests that I had to take to qualify or whatnot, involved a heavy math thing. And that was the first revelation. I loved it. It was bizarre. There was a right answer, first of all. I was like, wow, I can actually, if I just focus enough, I can do this. And that turned out to be a lot of what happened. Once I got there, I took way too many courses. I wanted to do it all because this was my chance. This was it. And then I just loved it. I met so many people. Everything was a door open, and it was challenging because I was still dancing and I wanted to still dance. If you want to see the updated, I know you read the 1995 Times article. There was one that they did that said he parked his bar at Harvard Yard was the headline. And because I literally was running from class at Kennedy School to Boston Ballet, where I had studied as a kid, to try to stay in shape, because I was on my way back to New York within a matter of, I was shifting back and forth so that I could still perform. I loved it. It opened up every possibility for me. It's an incredible program that, I rely on every day.
And you take that expertise when you're asked to join President Obama's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. And the Obama administration basically sits down and says, what do you need or what needs to be done? What did you say?
Well, I think the first exciting thing was with all that, kind of preamble of talking about the importance of the arts to a point where sometimes you just feel like, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. You're just saying this is so important and you're just not getting any traction in different ways. And this is a time when in America, there's been a steady lack of belief in a way in the role of arts and everything from education. It's just mind-bending that those conversations still even go on. But at that time, it was really a time when it was headed in very much the wrong direction from the 80s on, basically. So suddenly we have this candidate, Barack Obama, who has an arts platform and is, we have a committee that this is prior to him being elected that's making an actual platform for what we believe the role of the arts is in making a successful country in everything from economics and diplomacy to education and innovation. And it's unbelievable. Being on that committee for 8 years was thrilling, eye-opening, frustrating, all of the things that go into working in a governmental situation. But in the end, we did some very serious education work that really was a privilege to be a part of.
One of the products of this is it the Turnaround Arts program, which helps
Turnaround Arts. Yeah.
Failing schools actually turn themselves around through work with the arts.
Yeah, that was very, in a sense, transactional, because it was like there was a program that literally was about turnaround schools. And it was like, what are the methodologies and what are the ways that we can turn around failing schools? And we were given a cohort of schools, essentially, to pilot. And then we proved it to the extent that that cohort steadily expanded. And it involved investments in arts teachers, investments in the instruments if it was music, or the supplies if it was visual art, or all the things that go into providing a meaningful artistic education experience. And then each of us on the committee who were practicing artists were mentors for different schools, and we teamed up in different ways. It was a tangible program that was very hard-edged about, the numbers and how this is going to improve performance and how this is going to actually affect outcomes. And that was a very meaningful experience.
And then you go to become president at Juilliard. And there is this aim now that one day you want to make this place tuition free. How important is that for you?
It's everything in so many ways. How do I cover this? First of all, let me just say this. We talked about my story, right? And the fact that I was kind of bumbling along in ballet and then discovered that it was something that was actually waiting to be discovered. It was ready. It was, the idea that if I had been walking around my whole life and not discovered that, it was just right for me. It really was. I was ready to excel. I needed the opportunity to know that it was in me, and then I needed the training, and then I needed the opportunity and the next step. None of that it might not have happened. It could not have happened. So first of all, every child deserves the right to discover that and to have that opportunity to discover the talents that they have. The second thing is that what stands in the way of that cannot be about money and proximity to wealth and other things. To my mind, art is, in fact, a public good. It is what we do as artists and what the arts community does and what artistic enterprises do, whether it's centers like I'm sitting in right now, or all manner of, from the local to the national, is part of development of society. It actually brings the sense of purpose, the sense of inspiration, the sense of context, of nuance, of knowledge that cannot be provided in other ways to a society. It is the thinking, breathing society that is an artistically enhanced society. That cannot be made, impossible by wealth. And so that's what we saw, certainly in something like Turnaround Arts, that if you actually take the instruments out, where in certain schools they were just locked up because they didn't have an arts teacher, a music teacher to work with the students, it's simply unacceptable on just what's right level. So if you believe that arts are public good, that cannot be a matter of money.
Damian, final question. You've been a dancer, a choreographer, a student, a teacher, a government advisor, an organizer, a leader, and now a president. What do you want to be when you grow up?
Oh my God, such a good question. You know what? There's that aperture question. So I think this is a very wide aperture I have right now. I think when I grow up, finally, I may go back to something that's smaller. I have a friend who's a composer, extraordinary composer, Caroline Shaw. And we laugh because we love small things. And I'm like, oh my God, this is not that. And so maybe when I grow up, there'll be a moment when, in kind of a very Japanese sense, I'll tend the garden. And I think that might be where it all ends.
Damian Woetzel, thank you so much for joining me on The Big Interview on Monocle Radio. Well, that's it for this edition of The Big Interview. It was produced by Gunnar Gronlid and edited by Jack Dewars. From me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.